He came to humiliate her in front of guests, but seeing 4 toddlers run to her calling, "Mama!" while wearing birthday hats with his family name made his jaw drop. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Jessica Turner adjusted the hem of her pencil skirt nervously, her fingers trembling slightly as she sat in the opulent waiting area outside Richard Blackwood's office. The leather chair felt cool beneath her, a stark contrast to the warmth spreading across her cheeks. She glanced at her watch. 3 minutes until their scheduled meeting. 3 minutes until she would change both their lives forever. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan spread out like a glittering promise, the same view that had captivated her when she'd first arrived from Nebraska 3 years ago. Back then, she'd been wide-eyed and hopeful, clutching her business degree and dreaming of conquering Wall Street. Now, at 26, she had climbed from administrative assistant to executive secretary to the CEO of Blackwood Enterprises in record time. And somewhere along that ascent, professional admiration had transformed into something more complex and dangerous. Jessica's hand drifted unconsciously to her designer handbag, a Christmas gift from Richard, where the positive pregnancy test lay carefully wrapped in tissue paper. She remembered the moment she'd taken it in her tiny queen's bathroom, watching with disbelief as 2 pink lines appeared, confirming what her body had been trying to tell her for weeks. She closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself to replay fragments of the past 2 years, stolen glances during executive meetings that evolved into late-night strategy sessions, the first time he'd kissed her in the elevator after everyone had gone home, weekends in discreet hotels where he'd whispered promises against her skin, Richard's complaints about the emptiness of his penthouse apartment, the coldness of his personal life despite his professional success, the way he'd looked at her sometimes, as if she were the only real thing in his carefully constructed world. "Ms. Turner?" Richard's current assistant, a glacial blonde who clearly suspected something about their relationship, appeared at the doorway. "Mr. Blackwood will see you now." Jessica stood, smoothing her skirt one final time. She had rehearsed this moment in the executive bathroom earlier, what she would say, how she would say it. She had even practiced her smile, wanting to appear confident and calm when she delivered the news. Yet her heart hammered against her ribs as she walked the short distance to his office door. Richard Blackwood's office was a testament to power. 3,000 square feet of calculated intimidation with views of the city from 3 sides. At 42, Richard commanded the space with the easy confidence of someone born to wealth and groomed for power. His family had been Wall Street royalty for generations. The Blackwood name opened doors, influenced policy, and inspired both fear and respect throughout the financial world. He looked up as she entered, his piercing blue eyes warming slightly at the sight of her. He was impeccably dressed as always, his Italian suit perfectly tailored to his athletic frame. Even after 2 years, the sight of him still made her breath catch. "Jessica," he said, rising from his desk with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "This is a surprise. Our meeting wasn't until 4, wasn't it?" "I needed to speak with you privately," she replied, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "It's important." Something in her tone made his smile falter. He walked to the windows, gazing out at the empire of steel and glass before turning back to her. "Is something wrong?" Jessica took a deep breath. There was no perfect way to say it, no gentle introduction that would soften the impact. "I'm pregnant, Richard." The silence that followed was absolute. Richard's expression froze, his body becoming unnaturally still. For several long seconds, the only sound in the vast office was the faint hum of the climate control system. Jessica stood her ground, watching as emotions flickered across his face too quickly to identify. When he finally moved, it was to walk slowly back to his desk, putting the massive mahogany barrier between them. His posture had changed, becoming more formal, more distant. When he looked up, his blue eyes were cold, assessing her as if she were a problematic acquisition rather than the woman who had shared his bed for 2 years. "Are you sure it's mine?" he asked, his voice clinically detached. The question hit Jessica like a physical blow. She took an involuntary step backward, her hand flying to her stomach in a protective gesture. "How can you even ask that? You know I've only been with you for the past 2 years." Richard laughed, a hollow sound entirely devoid of humor. "Jessica, let's be practical. A pregnant secretary is a burden I don't need, especially one without the pedigree to carry the Blackwood name." "Pedigree?" Jessica repeated, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Richard, we're talking about a child. Our child." He opened a drawer and withdrew his checkbook, deliberately uncapping an expensive fountain pen. The scratch of the nib against paper seemed unnaturally loud as he wrote. With a practiced flick of his wrist, he tore the check free and slid it across the polished desk surface. "This should cover your expenses," he said coolly. "A discreet abortion, perhaps a little time off afterward. Or do whatever you want with it, as long as you keep my name out of it." Jessica stared at the check, the number making her dizzy. $50,000, the amount he thought her unborn child was worth, the price he was willing to pay to make her disappear. "You think you can just pay me off?" she whispered, tears beginning to form despite her determination to remain composed. "Richard, this isn't about money. This is about us, about our future." "There is no us, Jessica," he replied, leaning back in his leather chair. "There never was. Not in the way you're imagining. You were a pleasant diversion, nothing more." "A diversion?" Her voice cracked on the word. 2 years of my life was just a diversion for you?" Richard sighed, as if her emotional response was tedious. "You will never be enough, Jessica," he said with glacial calm. "Just a girl from Nebraska trying to climb the social ladder. Did you really think that I, a Blackwood, would introduce you as the mother of my heir? To my mother? To the board? You are common, dispensable." Each word cut deeper than the last. Jessica stood frozen, silent tears tracking down her cheeks as the man she thought she knew systematically destroyed every hope, every dream she'd nurtured about their future together. Richard pressed the intercom button on his desk. "Security to my office, please. And HR. We need to process an immediate termination." "You're firing me?" Jessica asked incredulously. "Just like that?" "Your position requires discretion and professionalism. You've demonstrated neither by bringing this personal matter into my office." His voice was dispassionate, as if he were discussing the weather rather than dismantling her life. "Your final paycheck will be processed today. References will depend on how quietly this matter is resolved." The office door opened and 2 security guards entered, followed by a tense-looking woman from Human Resources clutching a folder. Jessica recognized her, Sarah from the 4th floor, who had always been friendly during company functions. Now Sarah couldn't meet her eyes, her gaze fixed firmly on the carpet. "Ms. Turner needs to be escorted from the building," Richard instructed, already turning his attention to the papers on his desk. "Standard termination protocol." "Richard, please," Jessica said, hating the pleading note in her voice but unable to stop herself. "We need to talk about this. You can't just—" "I believe I've said everything necessary," he interrupted, not bothering to look up. "Goodbye, Jessica." The next 15 minutes passed in a humiliating blur. Sarah awkwardly explained termination procedures while the security guard stood by, impassive. Jessica was marched to her desk to collect personal items, conscious of curious glances and whispered speculation from colleagues. Someone had already placed a cardboard box beside her computer. With mechanical movements, she placed her few belongings inside: a framed photo of her parents' farm, a spare pair of shoes, the novel she'd been reading during lunch breaks. Her company ID and access card were confiscated. Her computer had already been locked. As they escorted her through the vast lobby past the marble columns and the massive Blackwood Enterprises logo, Jessica caught her reflection in the polished brass doors, pale face, red-rimmed eyes, a woman holding a cardboard box containing the remnants of a career she'd worked so hard to build. Outside, January's bitter cold hit her like another slap. Her light coat was inadequate protection against the winter afternoon, and snowflakes had begun to fall, melting against her flushed cheeks. The security guards retreated back into the warmth of the building, leaving her alone on the freezing sidewalk, the box of her possessions clutched against her chest, the crumpled check burning a hole in her pocket. For several minutes, Jessica simply stood there, unable to process the seismic shift that had just occurred in her life. Pedestrians flowed around her, business people hurrying home, tourists gazing up at the skyscrapers. No one paid any attention to the woman whose world had just collapsed. Eventually, the cold forced her to move. She walked numbly to the subway station, descended the grimy stairs, and boarded the train to Queens. As the car rattled through dark tunnels, Jessica stared at her reflection in the window, silent tears streaming down her face. Other passengers carefully avoided looking at her, another broken heart in the big city, nothing unusual in a place where dreams routinely shattered against the hard edges of reality. In the weeks that followed, Jessica faced the brutal reality of her situation. Her small Queens apartment, already tight for one person, would soon become insufficient. Bills piled up, rent fell behind. Her meager savings, already stretched thin, were rapidly depleting. No financial firm on Wall Street responded to her resumes. Richard Blackwood's influence was long, and she had been quietly blacklisted throughout the financial sector. The first medical appointment brought news that left her in complete shock. Quadruplets. 4 tiny hearts beating, 4 lives depending on her. Jessica cried through the entire night, oscillating between absolute despair and fierce determination. After 3 months of pregnancy, Jessica was working 2 jobs: receptionist at a physical therapy clinic during the day and waitress at a diner during evenings. Her feet swelled, her back ached, and exhaustion was constant. But every penny was meticulously saved. Richard's check remained untouched in her drawer, a reminder of the humiliation she refused to accept. It was on a particularly difficult night, when the electricity in her apartment had been cut off due to non-payment, that Jessica had her epiphany. By candlelight, she wrote in her journal, "They'll say I'm crazy for having 4 children alone, without resources, without support. Maybe I am, but these babies will not beg for crumbs from a father who rejected them before they were even born. Richard's check will not be used to eliminate us from his perfectly planned life. It will be the seed capital to build something he could never imagine possible. One day, I'll return to Wall Street, not as a secretary, but as a competitor. Richard Blackwood's rejection will be the foundation upon which I'll build my empire, and when that day comes, he'll know how wrong he was about me." The next morning, Jessica Turner deposited the $50,000 check into a new business account under the name Innovate Solutions LLC, not for an abortion but to initiate her children's future. While signing the founding documents of her company with one hand and caressing her growing belly with the other, Jessica had no idea she was creating not just 4 lives, but also the company that would revolutionize Wall Street. Jessica woke up the next morning with a strange sense of calm. The pregnancy test sat on her nightstand, a silent reminder of the life-altering reality she now faced. She picked it up, studying the 2 pink lines that had changed everything. Tucking it into her purse, she headed to her first prenatal appointment, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach with each passing block. The waiting room at the women's clinic was crowded with expectant mothers in various stages of pregnancy. Some were accompanied by beaming partners who held their hands and flipped through parenting magazines. Jessica sat alone, her hands folded protectively over her still flat abdomen. Jessica Turner? A nurse in blue scrubs called her name, smiling warmly. The examination room was cold and clinical. Jessica changed into a paper gown that crinkled with every movement, waiting nervously for the doctor to arrive. When Dr. Patel entered, her kind eyes immediately put Jessica somewhat at ease. "So, Ms. Turner, You're here to confirm a pregnancy? Yes, Jessica replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The home test was positive. Dr. Patel nodded professionally as she began the examination. When the ultrasound wand touched Jessica's abdomen, the doctor's expression changed subtly. Her eyebrows raised slightly as she adjusted the angle, studying the screen with increasing concentration. Is something wrong? Jessica asked, panic rising in her throat. Dr. Patel turned the monitor so Jessica could see. No, nothing's wrong. But I do have unexpected news. She pointed to the screen. Do you see these areas here, 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 and here? Her finger indicated 4 distinct shapes. Those are separate embryonic sacs. Jessica stared at the screen, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. What does that mean? It means you're carrying quadruplets, Ms. Turner. 4 babies. The world seemed to tilt beneath Jessica. 4? She repeated numbly. That's impossible. There are no multiples in my family. Spontaneous quadruplets are extremely rare, Dr. Patel agreed, but they do happen. And in your case, they have happened. Jessica's mind raced frantically. 1 baby had seemed an insurmountable challenge. But 4? Her tiny apartment, her non-existent savings, her precarious employment situation flashed before her eyes in a terrifying montage. How can I possibly… The words stuck in her throat. Dr. Patel placed a compassionate hand on Jessica's shoulder. This will be a high-risk pregnancy. You'll need specialized care, proper nutrition, and significantly reduced stress. She paused, her expression softening. Is the father in the picture? Jessica closed her eyes, Richard's cruel words echoing in her mind. No, she said firmly. He's not. Later that evening, Jessica sat cross-legged on her bed, her laptop open to a spreadsheet that made her stomach churn. The numbers didn't add up, no matter how she calculated them. Rent, utilities, food, medical expenses, baby supplies, multiplied by 4. The meager savings she'd managed to accumulate would barely last 3 months. Her cell phone rang, a former colleague from Blackwood Enterprises. Jessica, it's Megan. I heard what happened. Are you okay? Jessica hesitated. I'm adjusting. Listen, Megan's voice dropped to a whisper. I wanted to warn you. I tried submitting your resume to Goldman, but HR called back. They said you were on some kind of list. I think he's blacklisted you. A cold weight settled in Jessica's chest. Across the whole sector? It seems that way. I'm so sorry, Jess. After hanging up, Jessica stared at the wall, a familiar numbness spreading through her. She had hoped her finance degree and 3 years of Wall Street experience would at least secure her a decent position somewhere else in the financial sector. But Richard's influence extended far beyond the walls of Blackwood Enterprises. Over the next few weeks, Jessica's inbox filled with rejection emails. Each one polite, each one vague, each one crushing another piece of her already fragile hope. By her 4th month of pregnancy, she had expanded her job search beyond finance, applying for anything that might provide a steady income. The physical therapy clinic was her first break. They needed a receptionist immediately, and Jessica's professional demeanor impressed the owner. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but it was something. The diner job came next, an evening shift that left her feet swollen and her back aching, but added precious dollars to her dwindling account. One rainy Tuesday, Jessica returned home after a 14-hour workday to find a disconnection notice taped to her door. The electricity would be shut off by Friday if payment wasn't received. Inside her apartment, she sank onto the threadbare couch, too exhausted to cry. Her hand moved to her growing belly, where she could now feel occasional flutters of movement. 4 tiny lives depending entirely on her. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered into the empty room. That Friday, Jessica returned to a dark apartment. The electricity had been disconnected as promised. She lit candles, their flickering light casting long shadows across the walls. In this uncertain light, she opened her journal and began to write. her pen moving quickly across the page. "They'll say I'm crazy for having 4 children alone, without resources, without support. Maybe I am. But these babies will not beg for crumbs from a father who rejected them before they were even born. Richard's check will not be used to eliminate us from his perfectly planned life. It will be the seed capital to build something he could never imagine possible. One day, I'll return to Wall Street, not as a secretary, but as a competitor. Richard Blackwood's rejection will be the foundation upon which I'll build my empire. And when that day comes, he'll know how wrong he was about me." Jessica closed the journal and reached for the drawer where she had placed Richard's check, still uncashed. She held it up to the candlelight, studying his signature, elegant, confident, entitled. The amount, $50,000, was meant to erase her, to erase the life growing inside her. Instead, it would become the foundation of something new. The next morning, Jessica stood in line at the bank, her resolve hardening with each passing minute. When she reached the teller, she spoke clearly. "I'd like to open a business account under the name Innovate Solutions LLC." The teller smiled blandly. "Of course. Do you have your LLC documentation?" Jessica pulled out the papers she had filed online the night before, along with Richard's check. As the teller processed her request, Jessica felt a strange sense of power. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about transformation. By her 6th month, Jessica's body had changed dramatically. Her formerly slender frame now supported a belly that seemed impossibly large for her petite stature. Dr. Patel had ordered bed rest, but financial necessity made that impossible. Jessica continued working both jobs, ignoring the concerned looks from customers and co-workers alike. "You really should be resting," Mrs. Chen, the owner of the diner, said one evening as Jessica winced while reaching for a coffee pot. "4 babies is no joke." "Neither are bills," Jessica replied with a tired smile. Her tiny apartment had gradually transformed. The second-hand crib she'd purchased from a thrift store dominated her bedroom. Baby books and parenting magazines covered every surface. A notebook filled with software ideas and business models sat beside her bed. Plans for Innovate Solutions, sketched out during sleepless nights when the baby's movements kept her awake. During her 7th month, Jessica was placed on mandatory bed rest after a particularly frightening episode of contractions. Her supervisor at the clinic was sympathetic but firm. Her position couldn't be held indefinitely. The diner let her go more gently, with Mrs. Chen pressing a red envelope containing $500 into her hand. "For good luck," the older woman said, patting Jessica's enormous belly. "Those babies need their mama healthy." Confined to bed, Jessica turned her full attention to developing her business plan. Her background in finance gave her unique insight into the inefficiencies of traditional banking software. During her time at Blackwood, she had identified numerous opportunities for innovation that the old guard firms were too conservative to pursue. Her laptop became her lifeline. She spent hours researching competitors, sketching interface designs, and drafting code for a prototype that would demonstrate her concept. Between doctor's appointments and brief, doctor-approved walks around her apartment, Jessica built the framework for what would become her salvation. When her water broke at 32 weeks, Jessica was alone in her apartment, working on a particularly challenging section of code. The rush of fluid sent her into a panic. It was too early. The babies were too small. With shaking hands, she called emergency services, then her doctor. "Stay calm," Dr. Patel instructed over the phone. "The ambulance is on its way. Remember your breathing exercises." The next 12 hours passed in a blur of pain, fear, and ultimately, wonder. 4 tiny babies were delivered via emergency C-section: Ethan, Noah, William, and James Turner. Each weighing less than 4 pounds, they were immediately whisked to the NICU, their tiny bodies connected to a maze of tubes and wires. Jessica, weak from surgery and blood loss, couldn't see her sons until the following day. When a nurse finally wheeled her into the NICU, the sight of 4 incubators each containing a miniature human being that she had created, overwhelmed her completely. "They're fighters," the NICU nurse assured her, noting Jessica's tears. "All 4 have strong heartbeats and good lung function for their gestational age." Jessica reached a trembling hand into the first incubator, gently touching Ethan's tiny arm. "We're all fighters," she whispered. The babies remained in the hospital for 7 weeks. Jessica was discharged after 5 days but spent every possible moment in the NICU, learning to feed, change, and care for her sons. The medical bills mounted with terrifying speed, quickly surpassing her insurance cap. Each day brought new specialists, new procedures, new expenses. When the quadruplets were finally cleared for discharge, Jessica faced a new reality. Her apartment, already small for 1 person, now needed to accommodate 5. She had no job, dwindling savings, and 4 newborns who required around-the-clock care. That night, as all 4 babies miraculously slept simultaneously, Jessica opened her laptop. The Innovate Solutions business account showed a balance of $50,000, untouched since its deposit. With renewed determination, she began to work, typing code with one hand while gently rocking William's bassinet with her foot. Hours later, as dawn broke over Queens, Jessica saved her work and closed her laptop. She moved quietly around the room, checking each sleeping baby before finally allowing herself to rest. As she drifted toward sleep, a single thought crystallized in her mind. Richard Blackwood's money wouldn't be used to end a life after all. It would be used to create something extraordinary. While she signed the founding documents of her company with one hand and caressed her growing belly with the other, Jessica had no idea she was creating not just 4 lives, but also the company that would revolutionize Wall Street. While she signed the founding documents of her company with one hand and caressed her growing belly with the other, Jessica had no idea she was creating not just 4 lives, but also the company that would revolutionize Wall Street. Those days of hope and determination seemed distant now as she stared at the 4 identical cribs arranged in a semicircle around her bed. The apartment had transformed into a chaotic command center. Where once stood her small dining table, now sat 4 bassinets. The living room couch had been pushed against the wall to make space for the changing station. Her kitchen counter doubled as both food prep area and makeshift office. Her laptop perched precariously between formula containers and sterilized bottles. Jessica hadn't slept more than 2 consecutive hours in the 6 weeks since bringing the boys home from the hospital. Her body ached with a bone-deep exhaustion she hadn't known was possible. Yet somehow, between the endless cycle of feeding, changing, and comforting 4 newborns, she managed to work on her software prototype. "It's a feeding algorithm," she explained to Mrs. Gonzalez, her elderly neighbor who had taken to checking on her daily. The kind woman stood in the doorway, concern etched on her weathered face as Jessica paced the room with Ethan in one arm while typing one-handed on her laptop. "An algorithm for the babies?" Mrs. Gonzalez asked, confused. Jessica laughed, the sound rusty from disuse. "No, for my business. I'm developing financial software. The feeding schedule for the boys actually inspired it, optimizing resources for maximum efficiency." Mrs. Gonzalez shook her head, murmuring something in Spanish that sounded like a prayer. "You need sleep, mija. Let me take him while you rest." Jessica hesitated, her protective instinct warring with practical necessity. Finally, she handed Ethan over, her arms feeling strangely empty without a baby's weight. "Just for 30 minutes, she conceded, already knowing she would use the time to work rather than sleep. As the weeks passed, Jessica developed a system that bordered on military precision. Each baby had a color-coded chart tracking feedings, diaper changes, and sleep patterns. She placed them on synchronized schedules, a Herculean feat that earned her admiring comments from the pediatrician. "I've never seen quadruplets so well managed," Dr. Chen remarked during their 2-month checkup. "Most parents of multiples are complete wrecks by this point." Jessica smiled thinly, not mentioning that she'd been up until 3 in the morning fixing a bug in her code after finally getting all 4 boys to sleep simultaneously. Or that she'd cried in the shower that morning, the only place she allowed herself such indulgence, overwhelmed by both love for her sons and fear of failing them. The Gonzalez family became her unexpected salvation. Mrs. Gonzalez and her husband lived across the hall, their own children long grown and moved away. They adopted Jessica and the quadruplets with a fierce protectiveness that brought her to tears the first time Mrs. Gonzalez insisted on watching the babies so Jessica could take a real shower longer than 3 minutes. "You are not alone," Mrs. Gonzalez told her firmly. "In my country, babies are raised by the village. We are your village now." On rare nights when all 4 babies slept at once, Jessica worked feverishly on her software, the blue light of her laptop screen illuminating her exhausted face. She developed a sophisticated algorithm that could predict market fluctuations with unprecedented accuracy, drawing on her intimate knowledge of how traditional firms like Blackwood Enterprises made decisions. "They're dinosaurs," she whispered to Noah, who had awakened for a midnight feeding. She cradled him against her chest while typing with her free hand. "They use outdated models because that's what they understand. But the market has evolved, and they haven't." Noah blinked up at her with unfocused, newborn eyes that were already showing hints of Blackwood blue. By the time the quadruplets reached 6 months, Jessica had completed her prototype. She had also developed tendinitis in her right wrist from typing while holding babies, lost 15 pounds she couldn't afford to lose, and perfected the art of conducting business calls with muted babies strapped to her chest. Her apartment walls were covered with post-it notes detailing code fragments and market insights. Between the cribs and baby swings stood whiteboards filled with flowcharts and mathematical formulas. Jessica moved through this chaos with practiced efficiency, stepping over toys to reach her makeshift standing desk, bouncing a fussy James on her hip while reviewing financial regulations on her tablet. The day Jessica ran into David Hayes was the day everything shifted. She had managed to secure an interview with a small investment firm, nothing prestigious, but they needed an analyst and were willing to overlook her unexplained absence from the job market. With the Gonzalezes watching the babies, Jessica had put on her pre-pregnancy suit, still tight across her chest from nursing, and headed to Midtown. The interview went poorly. The moment she mentioned having infant quadruplets, the hiring manager's expression changed from interest to alarm. By the time Jessica left the building, she knew she wouldn't get a call back. Standing in the lobby, fighting back tears of frustration, she literally bumped into David Hayes, a former colleague from Blackwood Enterprises who had left 6 months before her termination to start his own consulting firm. "Jessica Turner?" David's surprise seemed genuine. "I heard you'd left Blackwood. Where have you been hiding?" Jessica looked up at David, tall, slightly rumpled with kind eyes that had always made him stand out among the sharks at Blackwood. For a brief moment, she considered giving him the sanitized version of her departure. Instead, exhaustion and desperation pushed honesty to the surface. "I was fired after I told Richard I was pregnant," she said bluntly. "I now have 6-month-old quadruplets and I'm developing financial software from my kitchen table between feedings." David blinked, processing this information avalanche. "Quadruplets? Yours and Richard's?" "Mine," Jessica corrected firmly. "Just mine." To his credit, David recovered quickly. "You're developing software? What kind?" Jessica hesitated, protective of her idea yet desperate for professional validation. "A predictive market analysis system. It's nearly ready for beta testing, but I haven't had any takers." "I'd like to see it," David said, surprising her. He handed her his card. "My firm could use something like that if it works as well as your previous models at Blackwood." 3 days later, David sat in Jessica's cluttered apartment, surrounded by baby paraphernalia, his attention focused intently on her laptop screen. Jessica had managed to shower and put on clean clothes, small victories that felt monumental. The quadruplets were napping, a rare synchronicity that Jessica attributed to divine intervention. "This is remarkable," David said finally, looking up from the prototype demonstration. "You built this while raising 4 infants by yourself?" Jessica nodded, too tired for false modesty. "I work when they sleep, sometimes when they're awake too." David leaned back, studying her with new respect. "Blackwood was criminally stupid to let you go. This algorithm is more innovative than anything their R&D department has produced in 5 years. Will your company use it?" Jessica asked directly, hope making her voice tense. "Better," David replied. "We'll be your first client, and I know at least 3 other firms that would jump at this once they see results." The contract was signed on Jessica's kitchen table, between a stack of diapers and a row of sterilized bottles. The advance payment, modest by Wall Street standards but a fortune to Jessica, allowed her to hire a part-time nanny, a godsend that meant she could finally sleep for 4 consecutive hours some nights. With the assistance of Mrs. Gonzalez and the new nanny, Jessica established a more sustainable routine. The babies continued to thrive, each developing distinct personalities despite their identical appearances. Ethan, the oldest by 2 minutes, was serious and observant. Noah babbled constantly in what sounded like his own language. William had discovered his hands and studied them with scientific fascination. James, the smallest at birth, had become the most physically active, constantly wriggling to explore his surroundings. Jessica's software exceeded expectations at David's firm. The resulting referrals brought 3 more clients within weeks. For the first time since the quadruplet's birth, Jessica allowed herself to believe that her impossible gamble might actually succeed. "We're doing it, boys," she whispered one night, looking at her sons sleeping peacefully in their cribs. "We're actually doing it." The first major business meeting with all 4 babies in attendance wasn't planned. Jessica had arranged for the nanny to watch them while she presented her expanded software package to a potential major client. When the nanny called with a family emergency 30 minutes before the meeting, Jessica faced an impossible choice. "Bring them," David suggested when she called to reschedule. "The clients are international. They'll understand family obligations better than most Americans." And so Jessica arrived at the gleaming offices of a Japanese investment firm, pushing a specialized quad stroller, a diaper bag slung over one shoulder and her laptop bag over the other. The 4 6-month-olds were dressed in identical blue onesies, freshly fed and mercifully content. The Japanese executive's initial surprise quickly transformed into delight. Between demonstrations of her software, Jessica efficiently tended to her sons, changing diapers and offering bottles with practiced ease. Rather than deterring the clients, her obvious competence under extraordinary circumstances seemed to impress them deeply. "If you can create this caliber of software while raising 4 babies alone," the lead investor said through his translator, "we believe you can accomplish anything. We would like to move forward with implementation immediately." As they signed the largest contract of her fledgling business, Jessica felt a distinct shift in the atmosphere. She wasn't being pitied or merely accommodated. She was being respected for her exceptional abilities under pressure. Later that evening, after the babies were asleep, David stayed to help Jessica organize the expanded project timeline. They worked side by side at her small kitchen counter, their shoulders occasionally touching as they leaned over spreadsheets. "You were amazing today," David said quietly. "I've never seen anything like it." Jessica looked up, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. For the first time in over a year, she noticed a man as something other than a potential client or baby-related service provider. David's kind eyes held admiration that had nothing to do with pity. "I'm just doing what needs to be done," she replied, her voice softer than intended. "No," David shook his head. "What you're doing is extraordinary. You're extraordinary." When his hand tentatively covered hers on the counter, Jessica didn't pull away. The warmth of human connection after months of isolation was overwhelming. She turned her palm upward, their fingers intertwining. "I should go," David said, though he made no move to leave. "You could stay," Jessica suggested, surprising herself with her boldness. "Just to talk." The boys usually give me at least 2 hours before the first one wakes up. David smiled, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Jessica smiled back without calculation or exhaustion, a genuine expression of emerging hope. As dawn broke hours later, Jessica watched David sleeping on her couch. They had talked until midnight, sharing stories and plans until Jessica's eyes had grown heavy. He had insisted she take her bed while he claimed the couch, an arrangement that spoke volumes about his character. Through the window, pink light spilled across the room, illuminating her 4 sleeping sons and the man who had seen value in her when she most needed validation. On her laptop screen, the completed software gleamed with promise. Observing her 4 babies sleeping peacefully after her first great professional success, Jessica didn't imagine that these same exhausted infants would one day be recognized as prodigies and heirs to an empire that would make Blackwood Enterprises seem tiny by comparison. 4 years passed in a blur of milestones, both personal and professional. The cramped Queen's apartment had given way to a modest office space in the Bronx, the name Innovate Solutions displayed in sleek silver letters on a glass door. What had begun as a desperate gamble at Jessica's kitchen table had grown into a legitimate business with 6 employees, all drawn by the innovative algorithms that were quietly revolutionizing how smaller investment firms operated. Jessica stood in the center of the office, surveying her domain with quiet pride. The space wasn't large, just 2,000 square feet divided into an open work area, a small conference room, and a separate space cordoned off by glass partitions where the quadruplets could play under watchful eyes. "Ms. Turner, the Patterson meeting is confirmed for 3 o'clock, called Alicia, the administrative assistant Jessica had hired last month, and David called to say he'll be here with the new projections by noon. "Perfect, thank you," Jessica replied, adjusting her blazer, a significant upgrade from the threadbare suits she'd worn during those first desperate client meetings, though still far from the designer labels of her Blackwood days. Through the glass partition, she could see her 4-year-old sons engaged in various activities. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, meticulously arranging colored blocks in patterns that seemed random to the untrained eye but which Jessica knew represented complex mathematical sequences. Noah was reading to his brothers, holding a picture book upside down while inventing an elaborate story in his peculiar mix of English and made-up words. William and James were sharing headphones connected to a tablet, their identical faces scrunched in concentration. Jessica watched them with a mixture of awe and exhaustion. At 4 years old, the quadruplets were already showing signs of extraordinary intelligence. Their pediatrician had suggested advanced testing after each boy had demonstrated abilities far beyond typical developmental milestones. Ethan, in particular, seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of mathematics that both thrilled and slightly unnerved Jessica. Her reverie was interrupted when David Hayes entered the office, carrying a cardboard tray of coffee cups and a folder tucked under his arm. At 38, David had become not just her most loyal client, but her most steadfast supporter, and, for the past 2 years, her partner in every sense of the word. "Thought you might need reinforcements," he said, handing her a large cup. "Double espresso, 1 sugar." "You're a mind reader," Jessica smiled, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Did the Westport numbers come through?" "Better than projected," David replied, setting his folder on a nearby desk. "They're seeing a 17% improvement in predictive accuracy compared to their old system. They want to discuss expanding implementation to their Asian markets." Jessica's eyebrows rose. "That would be our first international extension." Their conversation was interrupted by a small commotion from the children's area. Ethan had approached the glass wall where a whiteboard displayed equations for a new algorithm Jessica's team was developing. With a marker he'd somehow procured, the 4-year-old was confidently correcting a formula. "Ethan, honey, that's not a drawing board," Jessica called, moving toward the partition door. She stopped short when her lead developer, Marcus, approached the board with a puzzled expression. "Wait," Marcus said, studying Ethan's correction. He calculated something on his phone, then looked up in astonishment. He's right. The variable assignment was incorrect. He turned to Jessica. Your son just fixed an error we've been debugging for 2 days. David chuckled at Jessica's stunned expression. Like mother, like son. That evening, after a successful client meeting where they secured the Westport expansion, Jessica sat on the floor of their living room in the new apartment in Upper East Side. The space was modest by Manhattan standards but palatial compared to the Queen's apartment. 3 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a living area large enough for 4 active boys. "Okay, coding club," Jessica announced, opening her laptop as the quadruplets gathered around eagerly. "Today we're going to learn about loops. Who remembers what a loop does?" "It's when the computer does the same thing over and over and over and over," Noah replied enthusiastically, demonstrating with a spinning motion that made his brothers giggle. "That's right," Jessica nodded, displaying a simple game she'd created where cartoon characters moved according to basic commands. "And who can tell me why loops are useful?" "Because it's more efficient than writing the same instruction many times," Ethan answered seriously. "It's optimization." Jessica smiled, never ceasing to be amazed by how her sons absorbed complex concepts as though they were nursery rhymes. She had begun teaching them coding basics as a game when they were 3, discovering that they not only enjoyed it, but showed remarkable aptitude. What had started as a way to keep them occupied while she worked had evolved into a daily ritual they all cherished. As the boys took turns creating simple commands, Jessica reflected on how far they'd come. The desperate days of juggling newborns while struggling to launch a business seemed like another lifetime. Yet the memory of Richard's dismissive words, "You are common, dispensable," still occasionally surfaced, usually when she faced a particularly challenging obstacle. Those words had transformed from wounds into fuel, driving her forward when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. Her phone chimed with a calendar alert. The quadruplets' first day at the prestigious Dalton School was scheduled for tomorrow. Jessica had agonized over school selection, finally choosing Dalton for its progressive approach to education and, though she barely admitted this to herself, its status as the alma mater of many Blackwood men. It was a small, petty victory perhaps, but the thought of her sons walking the same halls that had shaped generations of privilege gave her a certain satisfaction. "Bath time, boys," David announced, entering the living room after finishing a work call. The children groaned in unison but began dutifully packing up the coding materials. "I'll get their outfits ready for tomorrow," Jessica said, standing to kiss David's cheek as she passed. The nanny canceled for the morning. Family emergency. David frowned. "I have that meeting with Hargrove Bank at 9. Do you want me to reschedule?" "No need," Jessica assured him. "I'll handle the school drop-off and make it back for our presentation to Manhattan Trust at 11. Everything's prepared." Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Jessica sat at the kitchen table reviewing the Manhattan Trust presentation. This potential client represented their biggest opportunity yet, a mid-sized bank looking to overhaul their entire predictive analytics system. Securing this contract would allow Innovate Solutions to move from promising startup to established player. David sat across from her, his own laptop open, tie loosened around his neck. "The presentation looks solid," he said, scrolling through the slides. "If they go for the full implementation, we'll need to hire at least 3 more developers." Jessica nodded, trying to focus despite the growing knot of anxiety in her stomach. "And if they don't go for it, we might need to delay the office expansion." She rubbed her temples. "I hate that everything seems to be riding on this one meeting." David reached across the table to take her hand. "Hey, look at what you've already accomplished. 4 years ago, you were coding in a tiny apartment with 4 babies. Now you're pitching to Manhattan Trust. Whatever happens tomorrow, you're already defying the odds." The next morning was chaos. Despite Jessica's meticulous preparation, laying out 4 identical uniforms, packing 4 identical lunchboxes, setting 4 alarm clocks, everything that could go wrong did. Noah spilled orange juice on his shirt. William couldn't find his left shoe. James had a last-minute meltdown about not wanting to leave his favorite toy rocket behind. And Ethan, normally the most cooperative, refused to have his hair combed. By the time Jessica herded all 4 boys into a taxi, she was already dreading the Manhattan Trust presentation. Her hair was hastily pulled back. She'd abandoned her carefully selected outfit for the first clean suit she could find, and she hadn't had time for coffee. The quadruplets, however, looked impeccable in their pressed uniforms once the orange juice incident had been resolved with a spare shirt. At Dalton, the administration seemed overwhelmed by the arrival of identical quadruplets. The secretary did a double take, then a triple take, as Jessica signed each boy in. "They're all in different classes, correct?" the woman asked, glancing between the 4 identical faces with barely concealed anxiety. "Yes, as we discussed," Jessica confirmed. "They need to develop individual identities." After delivering each son to his respective classroom, with only Noah attempting a last-minute escape, Jessica checked her watch. 9:45. If the taxi arrived promptly, she'd have just enough time to return to the office, change into the spare outfit she kept there, and prepare for the 11 o'clock meeting. The taxi didn't arrive promptly. At 10:53, Jessica rushed into the Innovate Solutions office, her heart pounding. David met her at the door, his expression a mixture of concern and relief. "They're here early," he whispered. "Marcus is showing them the interface demo, but they're asking for you." Jessica ducked into the small office bathroom, changing rapidly into the spare outfit while simultaneously fixing her makeup and attempting to calm her racing pulse. 3 minutes later, she entered the conference room with a professional smile firmly in place. "Ms. Turner," the lead banker said, rising to shake her hand. "We were just admiring your preliminary implementation. Very impressive." The meeting proceeded smoothly until a commotion outside the conference room caught everyone's attention. Jessica turned to see Alicia's panicked face through the glass, accompanied by the school administrator and 4 identical boys in Dalton uniforms. Jessica's stomach dropped. "Please excuse me for just one moment," she said, stepping outside. "Ms. Turner, I'm so sorry," the administrator began, looking flustered. "There was a water pipe burst at the school. We had to evacuate the elementary wing. We tried calling, but my phone was off for the meeting," Jessica realized, heart sinking. "I understand." Behind her, she could hear the bankers murmuring among themselves. Her carefully constructed professional image was crumbling before her eyes. With no alternative, Jessica took a deep breath and turned back to the conference room. "Gentlemen," she said, opening the door, "I apologize for the interruption. It seems my son's school has had an emergency evacuation." She hesitated, then made a split-second decision. "May I introduce Ethan, Noah, William, and James?" The quadruplets filed into the room, standing in a perfect line as they'd been taught for important business situations. Each boy gave a small, practiced bow. "We apologize for disrupting your meeting," Ethan said formally. "It was not our intention to interfere with Mother's work." The lead banker's stern expression softened unexpectedly. 4 identical boys? That's quite remarkable." "Yes, they're quadruplets," Jessica explained, then added impulsively, "They're also the reason I developed our core algorithm. Managing their schedules required optimization solutions that eventually evolved into our predictive analytics system." To her surprise, the bankers seemed more intrigued than annoyed. As the boys settled quietly with tablets in the corner of the room, Jessica continued her presentation with renewed confidence, occasionally using her sons as real-world examples of how complex systems could be efficiently managed with the right analytical approach. When the presentation concluded, the lead banker approached the boys, who were now designing what appeared to be a rudimentary app on their shared tablets. "What are you building there?" he asked Noah, who happened to be closest. "It's a simplified version of Mommy's program," Noah explained earnestly, "but for planning playdates instead of money things." The banker laughed, genuinely delighted. Turning to Jessica, he extended his hand. "Ms. Turner, you've given us quite a unique presentation today. We'd like to move forward with the full implementation package." Later that evening, as David opened a bottle of champagne to celebrate their largest contract to date, Jessica watched her sons building an elaborate fort in the living room. The day's disaster had somehow transformed into their greatest success yet. "To the unexpected," David toasted, handing her a glass. Jessica smiled, clinking her glass against his. "To family business." As the boys giggled inside their blanket fortress, Jessica felt a warmth that transcended professional achievement. She was building something far more significant than a successful company. She was creating a future where her sons would never doubt their worth or their place in the world. While Jessica Adormicia, between drawings, infanties, and million-dollar contracts on the other side of the city, Richard Blackwood was receiving the first of many reports about a promising startup called Innovate Solutions, with no idea that its founder and his 4 heirs were the people he had discarded as dispensable. While Jessica Adormicia, between drawings, infanties, and million-dollar contracts on the other side of the city, Richard Blackwood was receiving the first of many reports about a promising startup called Innovate Solutions, with no idea that its founder and his 4 heirs were the people he had discarded as dispensable. 3 years passed in a flurry of growth and transformation, each day bringing Jessica closer to the vision she'd scribbled by candlelight in her darkest hour. "Do you, David Hayes, take Jessica Turner to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The officiant's voice carried across the intimate garden ceremony where Jessica stood in a simple ivory-sheath dress, her hair swept into an elegant updo adorned with small white flowers. "I do," David replied, his voice steady and sure as he gazed at the woman who had captured his heart through sheer force of character and determination. When the officiant turned to Jessica, she felt tears welling in her eyes. Never had she imagined finding love again after Richard's cruel dismissal, yet here she stood, 7 years after that devastating day, surrounded by those who truly valued her. "I do," she answered, squeezing David's hands. The most heartwarming moment came next, when David knelt down to face the quadruplets, now 7 years old, each impeccably dressed in miniature tuxedos with bow ties they had insisted on tying themselves. "Ethan, Noah, William, and James," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise to love your mother with all my heart and to be the best father I can be to each of you. Will you accept me into your family?" "We do," the boys chorused in perfect unison, eliciting laughter and tears from the small gathering of guests. Jessica watched her sons embrace David, their small arms wrapped around the man who had seen value in her when she most needed validation. The 4 identical faces, each bearing those unmistakable Blackwood blue eyes and distinctive chin, beamed with genuine happiness. 3 weeks after the wedding, Jessica stood in the spacious living room of their new apartment in Upper West Side, directing movers with quiet efficiency. The 3-bedroom unit was modest by Manhattan standards but represented a monumental step up from their previous accommodations. "Boys, come choose your bedrooms," she called, watching as the quadruplets raced down the hallway, their excited voices echoing off the freshly painted walls. For the first time, the boys would have separate spaces, 2 bedrooms shared between the 4 of them, rather than all crowded into one room. It was a small step toward individual identity that Jessica knew was important for their development. "Ethan and I want the blue room," Noah announced, dragging his brother by the hand. "Then we get the green one," William countered, James nodding emphatically beside him. David appeared beside Jessica, slipping an arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked softly. Jessica leaned into his embrace, watching her sons excitedly planning where their beds would go. "Beyond words," she whispered. The new Innovate Solutions office in Midtown occupied an entire floor of a sleek glass building. With 28 employees and a client list that included a dozen mid-sized financial institutions, the company had evolved from struggling startup to respected innovator in the fintech space. Jessica's office featured floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city, a far cry from the days of coding at her kitchen table. On her glass desk sat a framed photograph of the quadruplets in their school uniforms, their identical smiles a daily reminder of why she pushed herself so relentlessly. "The Singapore client is online too," her assistant announced through the intercom, "and the boys' school called. There's a parent-teacher conference they'd like to schedule next week." Jessica sighed, glancing at her calendar. Between expanding the business internationally and managing the boys' increasingly complex schedules, every day felt like a high-wire balancing act, yet she had never been happier or more fulfilled. The Dalton School's administrative offices were hushed and elegant, with wood-paneled walls and discreet displays of notable alumni achievements. Jessica sat beside David, her back straight and hands folded in her lap, as they faced the school's headmistress across an imposing mahogany desk. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, thank you for coming in today," the headmistress began, adjusting her glasses. "I wanted to discuss your son's recent assessment results." Jessica tensed slightly. "Is there a problem?" "Quite the contrary," the woman replied, sliding 4 identical folders across the desk. "Your sons have tested at extraordinary levels. Ethan's mathematical abilities are approximately 5 years beyond his grade level. Noah shows remarkable linguistic aptitude. His Mandarin instructor believes he has near-native comprehension already. William's musical assessment places him at a high school performance level, and James has broken every physical education record for his age group." David reached for Jessica's hand under the table, squeezing it gently. "We're considering accelerated programs for all 4, the headmistress continued. "But we wanted to consult with you first. Sometimes such exceptional children face unique social challenges." Jessica nodded, a bittersweet pride filling her chest. Her sons were extraordinary, but she worried about the burden of such exceptional abilities, especially given their unusual family situation. "There's one other matter," the headmistress added, her tone carefully neutral. "The boys have been asking questions about their biological father. Our school counselor mentioned they seem confused about why they have your surname rather than Mr. Hayes's." That evening, after dinner had been cleared and homework completed, Jessica gathered the quadruplets in the living room. David sat beside her, his supportive presence giving her strength for the conversation she had avoided for 7 years. "You've been asking about your biological father," she began gently, watching their identical expressions grow serious. "And why your last name is different from David's. Is it because he didn't want us?" Ethan asked directly, his analytical mind as always cutting straight to the core of the issue. Jessica took a deep breath. "Your biological father and I worked together at a company called Blackwood Enterprises. We had a relationship that was kept secret because he was my boss. When I told him I was pregnant with you, he wasn't happy about it." "Did he hate us?" Noah questioned, his expressive face showing the hurt that Jessica had dreaded. "No, sweetheart. He didn't know you to hate you," Jessica replied carefully. "He made a choice based on what he thought was important in his life, and family wasn't a priority for him." "What's his name?" William asked quietly. Jessica exchanged glances with David, who nodded encouragingly. "His name is Richard Blackwood. He runs a large financial company in Manhattan." "The Blackwood building downtown?" James asked, eyes widening. "With the big B on top?" "Yes, that's his company," Jessica confirmed. "Is he rich?" Noah inquired. "He has money, yes, but having money doesn't make someone a good person or a good father," Jessica explained. "David chose to be your father through love and commitment, which is far more valuable than any amount of money." The boys fell silent, processing this information. Then Ethan, ever the spokesman for the group, looked up with those piercing blue eyes, Richard's eyes. "He didn't want us, but you did," he stated simply. "You kept us even though it was hard." Jessica felt tears threatening. "Keeping you was the best decision I ever made." "And then you found David," William added, "who wanted us too." David leaned forward. "Finding you 5 was the luckiest day of my life." The quadruplets exchanged glances in that mysterious way they had of communicating without words. Then, in perfect synchronicity, They moved forward to envelop Jessica and David in a group hug. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Jessica showed David the adoption papers she'd been preparing. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "Legally becoming their father is a lifetime commitment." David took the papers, his expression solemn. "I've been their father in every way that matters for years. Making it legal would be my honor." 2 weeks later, in a simple courthouse ceremony, David Hayes legally adopted Ethan, Noah, William, and James Turner. As he signed the papers, tears streamed openly down his face. The quadruplets, understanding the significance of the moment despite their young age, stood solemnly beside him, each placing their hand atop his as he completed the final signature. "Does this mean we're Hayes now?" Noah asked, looking between Jessica and David. "You can be Turner Hayes if you like," Jessica offered. "Or you can stay Turner. It's your choice." "Turner Hayes," the boys decided in unison after a brief huddle. That same afternoon, Jessica received a call from a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. "Ms. Turner Hayes, I'm doing a feature on women entrepreneurs who've overcome significant obstacles. Your name keeps coming up in financial circles as someone who's built an impressive company while raising quadruplets as a single mother, at least initially." Jessica hesitated, protective of her privacy, yet aware of how her story might inspire others. "I'd be willing to discuss my professional journey," she said carefully. The resulting article, "The Revolutionary of Wall Street: How Jessica Turner Hayes is Redefining FinTech," appeared 3 weeks later, featuring a photograph of Jessica in her office with a small inset picture of the quadruplets with David at a company function. The piece detailed her innovative approaches to predictive analytics and briefly mentioned her background as a single mother of quadruplets who built her first algorithms between midnight feedings. Jessica placed the magazine on her desk, both proud of the recognition and slightly uneasy about the public exposure. Across town, in the executive suite of Blackwood Enterprises, the same magazine lay on Richard Blackwood's desk, casually flipped open to the financial section. He glanced at it briefly, not recognizing the name of the rising star in fintech as he moved on to more pressing concerns. That evening, Jessica found the quadruplets huddled around the dining room table, intensely focused on tablets and notebooks. "What are you working on?" she asked, peering over their shoulders at complex coding sequences far beyond what she'd been teaching them. "We're making an app," Ethan explained. "It helps kids organize their homework by priority and difficulty." "We already have the algorithm working," Noah added proudly. "William designed the interface." "And James is testing it for bugs," William completed. Jessica stared at their work in amazement. The project was sophisticated enough to be a professional product, yet these 7-year-olds had created it in their spare time. Later, as the family gathered in the living room, the boys and David worked on assembling a model rocket while Jessica watched from the couch, a sensation of profound contentment washing over her. This was the family she had fought for, the life she had clawed into existence through sheer determination when everyone else had told her it was impossible. That night, as Jessica fell asleep in David's arms, she didn't know that the publication in the Wall Street Journal was being read by someone on the board of Blackwood Enterprises, someone who was beginning to connect dots between the promising CEO and the secretary who had disappeared 8 years before. That night, as Jessica fell asleep in David's arms, she didn't know that the publication in the Wall Street Journal was being read by someone on the board of Blackwood Enterprises, someone who was beginning to connect dots between the promising CEO and the secretary who had disappeared 8 years before. The photograph accompanying the article, Jessica standing confidently beside her innovative market prediction software, had caught Eleanor Winter's attention immediately. As Blackwood's longest-serving board member, Eleanor remembered the quiet, efficient secretary who had vanished suddenly after a closed-door meeting with Richard. Now, looking at the successful entrepreneur with 4 identical sons, Eleanor found herself calculating timelines and noticing familiar blue eyes that mirrored those of the Blackwood family portraits hanging in the company's main hall. 5 years passed like the turning pages of a business success story. Headlines from financial publications chronicled the meteoric rise of Innovate Solutions and, increasingly, the troubling decline of Blackwood Enterprises. Innovate Solutions secures $50 million in Series C funding, expands to European markets. Turner Hayes algorithm revolutionizes risk assessment in banking sector. Blackwood Enterprises reports third consecutive quarter of losses. Market analysts question Blackwood's failure to adapt to changing financial landscape. In the sleek glass boardroom of Blackwood Enterprises, Richard Blackwood faced his increasingly dissatisfied board of directors. At 52, his once commanding presence had diminished, stress lines etching deeply around eyes that had lost their confident gleam. His tailored suit, still impeccably cut, hung slightly loose on a frame that had grown leaner through skipped meals and sleepless nights. "The numbers speak for themselves," said Eleanor Winters, sliding financial reports across the polished table. "We've lost 17% market share in the past 18 months alone. Our predictive models are being consistently outperformed by newer firms, particularly Innovate Solutions." Richard's jaw tightened at the mention of the company that had become his most persistent competitor. "Their success is based on unsustainable growth strategies. They'll overextend eventually." "They've been overextending for 5 years while consistently taking our clients," countered another board member. "Perhaps it's time we considered new leadership approaches." The veiled threat hung in the air as Richard gathered his papers, dismissing the meeting with a curt nod. In his corner office, smaller than his previous space, a concession to cost-cutting measures, he loosened his tie and poured himself a scotch, a habit that had become increasingly frequent. Across town, Jessica stood before a gathering of employees, investors, and press in the soaring atrium of the newly constructed Innovate Solutions headquarters in downtown Manhattan. At 37, she radiated confidence and success in her custom Armani suit, her once simple haircut now an elegant style that framed features refined by years of hard-won victories. "Today marks not just the opening of our global headquarters," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the space, "but the beginning of our next chapter of innovation." Beside her stood the Quadruplets, now 12 years old, each boy nearly reaching her shoulder. Though identical in appearance, their developing personalities showed in subtle ways. Ethan's serious, analytical stance, Noah's expressive hand gestures as he whispered something to William, William's artistic sensitivity evident in how he studied the architectural details, and James's athletic poise, his swimmer's shoulders already beginning to broaden. "I'd like to invite my sons to help cut the ribbon," Jessica continued, handing gold scissors to the boys. "After all, they were the inspiration for our very first algorithm." The crowd applauded as the 4 identical boys, dressed in matching navy blazers, simultaneously cut the red ribbon stretched across the entrance. Camera flashes captured the moment, another milestone in the remarkable story of Jessica Turner Hayes and her extraordinary family. That evening, in their spacious Upper West Side apartment, now occupying an entire floor of a prestigious pre-war building, Jessica reviewed college prospectuses that had already begun arriving despite the boys being only 12. Top universities were making early overtures, aware of the Quadruplet's exceptional abilities. "MIT sent another package for Ethan," David said, sorting through the mail, "and the Beijing Language Institute invited Noah to their summer immersion program." Jessica smiled, setting aside the Harvard brochure she'd been reviewing. William's violin instructor mentioned Juilliard is already expressing interest, and James's coach is talking Olympic development program. Their domestic tranquility was interrupted by the ringing of Jessica's phone. The caller ID showed Marcus, her chief technology officer. "Jessica, you need to see this," Marcus said without preamble. "Bloomberg just published an exposé on Blackwood's trading practices. They're alleging algorithmic manipulation to favor certain clients. The stock is in freefall." Jessica moved to her laptop, pulling up the financial news. Richard Blackwood's face dominated the screen, looking haggard as he pushed past reporters outside Blackwood's headquarters. The headline read, Blackwood Enterprises under federal investigation. CEO faces possible criminal charges. A complex emotion swept through Jessica. Not quite satisfaction, not exactly vindication, something more nuanced that she had no name for. "Keep me updated," she told Marcus, "and prepare contingency analyses on how this might affect market behavior in our sectors." After hanging up, she found David watching her carefully. "You okay?" he asked. "I am," she replied, somewhat surprised to discover it was true. "It's been a long time since Richard Blackwood had any power to affect me." The following month brought joy and sorrow in equal measure. The Quadruplets celebrated their 13th birthday with a party that showcased their individual interests. A mathematical puzzle hunt designed by Ethan, international cuisine selected by Noah, a string quartet featuring William on first violin, and an outdoor adventure course arranged by James. As Jessica watched her sons, no longer children but emerging young men, she felt a fierce pride that sometimes bordered on pain. They had grown into extraordinary individuals, each brilliant in his own way, each carrying physical features that unmistakably marked them as Blackwoods, though they bore the Turner-Hayes name. 2 weeks after the birthday celebration, tragedy struck without warning. David, returning from his morning run, collapsed in the lobby of their building. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. A sudden, massive heart attack that medical science could neither predict nor prevent. The funeral was a blur of black suits and murmured condolences. Jessica moved through the rituals of grief like a sleepwalker, maintaining composure for her sons, who stood beside her at the graveside, 4 identical faces streaked with tears. The Quadruplets had lost the only father they had ever known, the man who had chosen them and loved them unconditionally. The weeks that followed were the darkest since those desperate days after the Quadruplets' birth. Jessica found herself going through motions, attending meetings, making decisions, signing documents, but feeling disconnected from everything around her. She would work until exhaustion, fall asleep over financial reports, then wake with tears already streaming down her face. One evening, nearly a month after David's death, Jessica found herself alone in their bedroom, staring at the empty space where his clothes had hung. A soft knock at the door preceded the entrance of all 4 boys, moving with the synchronized precision that still sometimes startled outsiders. "Mom," Ethan began, clearly designated spokesperson, "we need to talk to you." The 4 settled around her on the bed, a formation they hadn't assumed since they were small children seeking comfort during thunderstorms. "You're not sleeping," Noah observed, "and you're not eating properly. We calculated that you've lost approximately 7 pounds since Dad died," William added quietly. "And your productivity metrics at work have declined by 23%, James concluded. Jessica looked at her sons, momentarily taken aback by their clinical assessment of her grief. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, a rusty, broken sound but genuine. "Are you analyzing me with algorithms?" she asked. "We're worried," Ethan explained simply. "Dad would want you to continue, but not alone. We are your team." The simple declaration broke something open inside Jessica. For the first time since David's death, she cried openly, allowing her sons to comfort her as she had so often comforted them. Later that week, while organizing David's office, Jessica discovered a journal he had kept. The final entry, written just days before his death, read, "Continue building, not just the empire, but the boys. Both are our legacies." The words became Jessica's lifeline. She returned to work with renewed purpose, channeling her grief into expansion and innovation. In honor of David's memory, she renamed the company Innovate Hayes Solutions, a tribute to the man who had believed in her vision when it was nothing more than desperate hope. 6 months after David's death, Jessica stood before her executive team, presenting plans for their most ambitious expansion yet. "The Asian markets represent our greatest opportunity for growth," she explained, indicating projection charts on the wall screen. Our algorithms are uniquely positioned to navigate the complexities of emerging financial technologies in China, Japan, and Singapore. As her team voiced enthusiastic support, Jessica felt a familiar surge of determination. This expansion would require everything she had, every skill, every ounce of courage, every lesson learned through years of struggle. But she was no longer the desperate young woman fighting for survival. She was Jessica Turner Hayes, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, mother to 4 extraordinary sons, and architect of her own destiny. Across Manhattan, in his increasingly sparse office, Richard Blackwood scanned the business section of the New York Times. A small article caught his attention. Innovate Hayes Solutions announces 300 mm Asian expansion. The accompanying photograph showed Jessica Turner Hayes, surrounded by 4 tall, identical teenage boys, all with striking blue eyes that seemed hauntingly familiar. Richard frowned, studying the image more closely. Something about the woman and those boys tugged at his memory, but he was too preoccupied with his company's mounting legal troubles to pursue the thought. He tossed the newspaper aside, returning to the stack of legal documents demanding his immediate attention. While signing the contract that would expand Innovate Hayes Solutions into Asia, Jessica didn't know that this decision would put her company on a direct collision course with the already fragile Blackwood Enterprises, setting the stage for an encounter that neither of them could have foreseen. While signing the contract that would expand Innovate Hayes Solutions into Asia, Jessica didn't know that this decision would put her company on a direct collision course with the already fragile Blackwood Enterprises, setting the stage for an encounter that neither of them could have foreseen. 2 years had passed since David's death, each day a careful balance of grief and forward momentum. The quadruplets, now 14, had grown into impressive young men, their identical faces maturing into sharper, more defined versions of the features Jessica saw in business magazines whenever Richard Blackwood made the news. Jessica stood in the doorway of their home study, observing her sons in their natural habitat. The large room had been transformed into what the family jokingly called Quadrant Labs, with 4 distinct workstations arranged in a circle, each reflecting its owner's personality and interests. Ethan's space was mathematical precision incarnate, 3 computer monitors displaying complex equations, notebooks filled with elegant proofs, and a small whiteboard covered in symbols that looked more like advanced physics than the work of a 14-year-old. Noah's area overflowed with language resources, textbooks in Mandarin, Russian, Arabic, and Spanish, headphones for his daily language immersion practice, and journals where he wrote in multiple scripts with impressive fluency. William's station combined technology with artistry, his coding screen sharing space with sheet music for his latest violin composition, a small keyboard connected to his computer for digital orchestration, and James, ever the athlete scholar, maintained the neatest workspace, his swimming medals displayed alongside biomechanics research and nutrition journals. "Dinner in 15 minutes, Jessica announced, smiling as 4 identical heads turned toward her in perfect synchronicity. "Is it Thai night?" Noah asked hopefully. "Yes, from that new place on 72nd Street, Jessica confirmed. "And I need to talk to you all about something important." The boys exchanged quick glances, that silent communication that still amazed Jessica even after 14 years. They could convey entire conversations with subtle eye movements and minute facial expressions. "About Richard Blackwood?" Ethan asked directly, his tone carefully neutral. Jessica froze. "Why would you ask that?" Ethan turned his monitor toward her, displaying a financial news site with Richard's photograph beside a headline about Blackwood Enterprises' continued struggles. His company lost another 17% market share this quarter. Their Asian investment division is particularly vulnerable. "We've been researching him," Noah added quietly. Jessica stepped fully into the room, taking a seat in the center of their circle. "For how long?" "Since you told us the truth about him when we were 7, William replied. "Initially just public information, but recently more comprehensive analysis." "Comprehensive how?" Jessica asked, a knot forming in her stomach. James pulled up a detailed spreadsheet on his tablet. Financial records, board meeting minutes, major investment decisions, personal spending patterns, divorce settlements. He paused, all publicly available through various databases, of course. Jessica stared at her sons, these brilliant minds she had nurtured, suddenly seeing them with new eyes. Of course they would have researched their biological father. It was in their analytical nature to seek information, to understand patterns and connections. "We've been meaning to ask you more about him," Ethan continued. "Not just the facts, but your personal experience. We've waited because we didn't want to cause you pain." Jessica took a deep breath. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," the four said in unison. After dinner, Jessica sat with her sons in their spacious living room, the remnants of Thai food still on the coffee table. She had begun at the beginning. Her arrival at Blackwood Enterprises as an ambitious young woman from Nebraska, her rapid rise from administrative assistant to executive secretary, and finally, the evolution of her relationship with Richard. He was charismatic, Jessica admitted. Brilliant in many ways, but also deeply entitled. His family had been powerful for generations, and he carried that certainty with him in everything he did. "When did the relationship become romantic?" Noah asked, his linguistic sensitivity making him the most attuned to emotional nuances. "About 6 months after I became his executive secretary. It started with late nights working on projects, then dinners to discuss strategy, and eventually—" Jessica trailed off, remembering those early days when Richard's attention had seemed like validation of her worth. "We were careful to keep it secret. Office relationships were strictly forbidden, especially between executives and their staff." "And when you told him about us?" William prompted gently. Jessica's expression hardened slightly. "I thought he would be surprised, maybe even concerned about complications, but ultimately happy. We had been together for 2 years. He had talked about feeling lonely in his personal life despite his professional success." She described the meeting in detail, her nervous anticipation, the test in her purse, Richard's initial shock followed by cold calculation. As she recounted his exact words, "You will never be enough, Jessica. You are common, dispensable." She was surprised to find the pain had dulled to a distant ache rather than the sharp agony it had once been. The quadruplets listened with identical expressions of focused attention, occasionally exchanging glances but otherwise remaining silent until she finished. "He wrote you a check," Ethan stated rather than asked. $50,000, Jessica confirmed, "to take care of the problem and disappear." "Which you used to start Innovate Solutions," James noted with a hint of satisfaction. "The best investment decision he never knew he made," Jessica agreed with a small smile. "Did you ever consider not having us?" Noah asked quietly, his eyes reflecting vulnerability beneath his analytical exterior. Jessica reached out, taking his hand firmly. "Not for a single second," she said with absolute conviction. "From the moment I knew you existed, you were mine to protect and nurture. Richard's rejection only strengthened my resolve. And then you found out there were 4 of us," William added, "which mathematically increased both the challenge and the reward by a factor of 4, Jessica said, using the kind of logical framing her sons appreciated. The boys fell silent, processing all they had learned. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice carrying the authority it had since he was small. "His loss," he said simply, "and our gain. We got you as our mother, and David as our father. Richard Blackwood got nothing." Jessica felt tears threatening at the edges of her vision. "That's a very kind way to look at it." "It's not kindness, it's accuracy," Noah corrected. "From a cost-benefit analysis, he made the poorest possible choice. He discarded 4 potential heirs and a partner who would have grown his empire exponentially. Instead, you built your own empire," William added. "Our empire," Jessica corrected gently. "Everything I've built has been for you 4. Later that evening, Jessica found the boys back in their study, huddled around Ethan's computer with unusual intensity. "What are you working on so intently?" she asked, leaning in to see complex financial projections on the screen. The boys startled slightly, an unusual reaction from them. Ethan quickly minimized the window, but not before Jessica caught glimpses of Blackwood Enterprises' logo and stock charts. "Just a school project," James said too quickly. "Economic forecasting." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "On Blackwood Enterprises specifically?" The quadruplets exchanged glances, a silent debate occurring in microseconds. Finally, Ethan reopened the window, revealing a comprehensive analysis of Blackwood's vulnerabilities and potential acquisition strategies. "We've been tracking their decline for 18 months, he explained. "Their Asian division is particularly unstable, and with your new expansion, you'll be positioned to acquire significant portions of their market share," Noah continued. "Or potentially the company itself," William added quietly. Jessica stared at the screen, then at her sons. "You've been planning a takeover of Blackwood Enterprises?" "Analyzing the possibility," Ethan corrected. "We haven't taken any action." "Yet," James added. Jessica sank into a chair, unsure whether to be impressed or alarmed by their initiative. "Boys, business acquisitions, especially of this magnitude, are extremely complex and delicate matters." "We know," Noah assured her. "That's why we've been studying mergers and acquisitions law in our spare time." "And corporate governance structures," William added. "And tax implications," James completed. Jessica shook her head, a reluctant smile forming. "I shouldn't be surprised. You've never done anything by half measures." "We're not suggesting immediate action," Ethan clarified. "Just preparation for potential opportunities. Richard Blackwood made a critical error in judgment 14 years ago. We're simply calculating the eventual cost of that error." The next morning, Jessica's assistant entered her office with an embossed envelope. "This just arrived by courier. It's an invitation to receive the Entrepreneur of the Year award from the American Business Association." Jessica opened the envelope, scanning the elegant invitation. The gala would be held at the Plaza Hotel in 3 weeks, a prestigious event attended by the most influential figures in American business. "There's a note saying you can request additional tickets if needed," her assistant added. "I'll need 5, Jessica replied. "1 for me and 4 for my sons." That evening, Jessica shared the news with the quadruplets over dinner. "It's quite an honor," she explained. "The ceremony recognizes innovations that have significantly impacted the financial sector." "We should attend," Ethan said immediately, his brothers nodding in agreement. "Are you sure?" Jessica asked. "It will be quite formal and full of business people twice your age." "We've been attending your company functions since we were infants," Noah reminded her with a smile. "Besides," William added, "we want to see you receive recognition for everything you've built." "And we'll behave impeccably," James promised with a grin that momentarily transformed his serious face into that of a mischievous child. Jessica looked at her sons with a mixture of pride and wonder. These extraordinary young men, brilliant, poised, and confident, were her greatest achievement, far surpassing any business success. The following week, the quadruplets requested an unusual family outing. They wanted to walk past the Blackwood building in the financial district. Jessica accompanied them with some trepidation, watching as they stood in a perfect line before the imposing structure, 4 identical faces tilted upward to study the architecture. "It's smaller than I expected," Noah commented. "And architecturally derivative," William added. "Our building has better energy efficiency ratings," James noted. Ethan said nothing, his analytical gaze taking in every detail as he mentally cataloged information for future reference. As they turned to leave, a business magazine on a nearby newsstand caught Jessica's attention. Richard Blackwood's face stared from the cover beside the headline, "Can the Blackwood Legacy be saved?" Jessica hesitated, then purchased a copy, tucking it into her bag without comment. Later, alone in her office, she studied the photograph of Richard, the lines of stress around his eyes, the gray at his temples, the defensive set of his jaw as he faced the camera. He looked like a man fighting a losing battle against time and changing markets. When Jessica arrived home that evening, she found an email from her assistant with the final confirmation of attendees for the American Business Association Gala. Scanning the list casually, a name near the bottom caused her heart to skip a beat. Richard Blackwood, CEO, Blackwood Enterprises. Jessica sat back in her chair, a complex mixture of emotions washing over her. After 14 years, she would be in the same room as the man who had dismissed her as common and dispensable. Only now she would be receiving an award that celebrated her extraordinary success while his empire crumbled. When Jessica accepted the invitation to the gala, she didn't imagine that the additional tickets requested by her sons would be the first step of a meticulously elaborated plan by 4 brilliant minds determined to close a circle that began before their birth. When Jessica accepted the invitation to the gala, she didn't imagine that the additional tickets requested by her sons would be the first step of a meticulously elaborated plan by 4 brilliant minds determined to close a circle that began before their birth. The evening before the American Business Association Gala found Jessica standing before the full-length mirror in her bedroom, the crimson Valentino gown still wrapped in protective tissue on her bed. Her reflection showed a woman transformed by 14 years of relentless determination, confident posture, clear eyes, and a face marked by both success and hard-won wisdom. The soft knock at her door revealed 4 identical faces peering in, each wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. "May we see the dress, Mom?" Noah asked, always the most diplomatic of the quadruplets. Jessica gestured them in with a smile. "I haven't tried it on yet. I was just about to." The boys entered with the synchronized movements that still occasionally startled outsiders. At 14, they had grown tall, their lanky frames promising the height that ran in the Blackwood lineage. Each wore well-tailored casual clothes, a concession to Jessica's insistence that they develop individual styles despite their identical features. The stylist said red would make a statement, Jessica explained, carefully lifting the gown from its wrapping. "Power, confidence, dominance." Ethan nodded approvingly. Statistically, red attire increases perception of authority by 23% in formal business settings. "And it'll look amazing when you're on stage accepting the award," James added with a grin. William ran his fingers lightly over the fabric. "The craftsmanship is exquisite." "Italian?" "Yes, hand-finished in Milan," Jessica confirmed, continually impressed by her son's eye for artistic detail. "Will you practice your speech for us?" Noah asked. "We could provide feedback on delivery and emotional impact." Jessica laughed softly. "Let me try on the dress first. The speech can wait until tomorrow." After the boys reluctantly left, Jessica slipped into the gown, the silk charmeuse cool against her skin. The designer had crafted the dress to flatter her athletic frame while projecting sophisticated power. High neckline in front with a dramatic open back, the silhouette both feminine and authoritative. Her thoughts drifted to the list of attendees her assistant had provided. Richard Blackwood would be there, presumably to network and maintain appearances despite his company's struggles. Jessica had spent 14 years imagining this moment, the day she would stand before the man who had discarded her and show him exactly what he had lost. Yet now that it approached, she felt strangely detached, as though Richard had become a footnote in her story rather than its antagonist. Across Manhattan, in his considerably smaller penthouse apartment, downsized after his second divorce 3 years earlier, Richard Blackwood stood before his own mirror, adjusting a bow tie that refused to cooperate. At 56, his once commanding presence had diminished. Gray dominated his temples, stress lines carved permanent paths around his eyes, and despite his expensive tailoring, his shoulders carried the visible weight of mounting failures. "Mr. Blackwood," his assistant called through the intercom. "The car will be here in 30 minutes." And the board chairman called again about tomorrow's emergency meeting. Richard sighed heavily, finally conquering the bow tie. The American Business Association Gala represented a critical networking opportunity, or rather, a desperate attempt to shore up failing alliances. The Blackwood name, once synonymous with financial power, now triggered whispers of mismanagement and obsolescence. His substantial donation to secure an invitation had stretched his personal finances, already damaged by 2 expensive divorces and declining company stock. But appearances had to be maintained. The Blackwood legacy demanded nothing less. Richard practiced his public smile in the mirror, confident, assured, revealing nothing of the panic that woke him at 3 each morning. The company founded by his great-grandfather was failing under his stewardship, and no amount of old-school networking or family connections seemed able to halt its decline. Innovation, he muttered to his reflection, practicing the buzzword he'd been advised to sprinkle through conversations. Forward-thinking approaches, market adaptability, empty phrases that couldn't disguise the truth. Blackwood Enterprises had failed to evolve, clinging to outdated models while companies like Innovate Hayes Solutions revolutionized the industry. The morning of the gala dawned bright and clear, a perfect May day in Manhattan. Jessica woke early, her usual 6 o'clock alarm unnecessary as anticipation had disrupted her sleep. She followed her regular routine: 30 minutes of yoga, a light breakfast, and a review of overnight developments in Asian markets where Innovate Hayes Solutions was rapidly expanding. Her phone chimed with a message from her communications director, Wall Street Journal requesting comment on rumors that IHS is considering expansion into traditionally Blackwood-dominated sectors. Jessica smiled slightly. The financial press had developed an almost obsessive interest in the perceived rivalry between Innovate Hayes Solutions and Blackwood Enterprises, despite the vast disparity in their current market positions. Her company was ascendant, while Blackwood struggled to remain relevant. "Confirm that we're always evaluating strategic opportunities but have no announcements at this time," she replied, the standard non-answer that would nonetheless fuel speculation. In the kitchen, she found all 4 boys already dressed in running clothes waiting for her. "Morning run?" Ethan asked, though it was more statement than question. Jessica nodded, grateful for their company. Their Saturday morning runs had become a family tradition, a time when business and academics were temporarily set aside for simple physical exertion and conversation. As they jogged through Central Park, Jessica observed her sons with quiet pride. Even in identical tracksuits, their individual personalities manifested in how they moved: Ethan's methodical pace, Noah's awareness of surroundings, William's appreciation of the park's design elements, James's natural athletic grace. "Are you nervous about tonight, Mom?" Noah asked as they completed their second lap. Jessica considered the question seriously, respecting her son's emotional intelligence. "Not nervous exactly. Perhaps contemplative." "Because of Richard Blackwood," William stated rather than asked. "Partly," Jessica admitted. "It's strange to think of seeing him after all these years." "Does he know we'll be there?" James inquired, barely breathing hard despite their brisk pace. "I doubt he's seen the attendee list that carefully," Jessica replied. "The gala will have over 300 guests. But he'll recognize you," Ethan pointed out. "Your photograph has been in several financial publications this year." Jessica nodded. "Probably, though I've changed considerably since we last met." "And we'll be with you," Noah added firmly. "All 4 of us." "Your support means everything to me," Jessica said, touched by their protective instincts. "But remember, this evening is about celebrating achievement, not confronting the past." The boys exchanged quick glances, one of their silent communications that Jessica had learned to recognize but not interpret. "Of course, Mom," they chorused with identical reassuring smiles that somehow failed to reassure her completely. By late afternoon, the Plaza Hotel had transformed into a glittering showcase of America's business elite. In the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements. Staff in formal attire moved efficiently through the space, attending to final details before guests arrived. In the Turner Hayes suite upstairs, organized chaos reigned. A stylist made final adjustments to Jessica's hair while her makeup artist applied finishing touches. Her assistant reviewed the evening's schedule, confirming Jessica's speech was loaded on the teleprompter and her table placement optimal for networking. In the adjoining room, the quadruplets stood before a row of mirrors, each adjusting the cuffs of identical custom-tailored tuxedos. Despite Jessica's encouragement of individuality, they had insisted on matching formal wear for this particular evening. "Final review," Ethan said quietly, meeting his brother's eyes in the mirror. "Primary objective?" "Support Mom's recognition," Noah replied promptly. "Secondary objective?" Ethan continued. "Initial assessment of Richard Blackwood," William answered. "Operational parameters?" Ethan asked. "Maintain composed demeanor. No direct confrontation. Gather data only," James recited. "And the contingency?" Ethan pressed. "Only if approached directly," Noah confirmed. Then, Protocol 17. The four nodded in synchronized agreement, their reflection a quadruple image of determined young faces with unmistakable Blackwood blue eyes. Across the hotel, Richard Blackwood entered alone, nodding to acquaintances with practiced casualness while noting who avoided his gaze, a growing number with each passing month. He accepted a champagne flute from a passing waiter, using the moment to survey the room. Many of the attendees had once been his peers or subordinates. Now they were potential lifelines for his struggling company. "Richard," called Eleanor Winters, approaching with measured steps. As Blackwood's longest-serving board member, she had witnessed both his rise and his gradual descent. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight." "The Blackwood name still carries weight in certain circles," Richard replied with forced confidence. "Besides, networking is essential in challenging times." Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Indeed. Speaking of networking, I believe Jessica Turner Hayes is receiving the Entrepreneur Award tonight. Her company's growth has been remarkable." Richard frowned slightly. "Turner Hayes? The name sounds vaguely familiar." "It should," Eleanor replied cryptically. "Her Innovate Hayes Solutions has absorbed 3 former Blackwood clients this quarter alone." She paused deliberately. "She'll be here with her sons, I understand. Quadruplets. Quite remarkable young men by all accounts." Richard nodded absently, his attention already shifting to a potential investor across the room. The information registered only peripherally. Another successful competitor. Another reminder of Blackwood's fading relevance. In the suite upstairs, Jessica stood before her sons, emotion momentarily overwhelming her practiced composure. The 4 young men before her, handsome, brilliant, kind, represented everything good in her life, everything she had fought for through years of struggle. "You all look so grown up," she said softly. "I'm so proud of you." "We're proud of you, Mom," Ethan replied, uncharacteristic emotion in his voice. "Remember," Jessica said, regaining her composure, "tonight is about celebrating achievement. Whatever happens, whatever unexpected situations arise, we stay focused on the positive." "Absolutely," Noah agreed smoothly. "Completely understood," William added. "Positive focus only," James confirmed. Jessica studied their faces, sensing something beneath their perfect agreement, but unable to identify exactly what. After 14 years of motherhood, she had learned to recognize when her sons were withholding information, but also when to trust their judgment. "Then let's go," she said, picking up her clutch. "It's time to celebrate." As the elevator descended toward the grand ballroom, Jessica mentally reviewed her acceptance speech, centering herself for the evening ahead. The quadruplets stood beside her in perfect formation, their identical faces composed and alert. While the elevator doors opened onto the glittering celebration, Jessica had no idea that in minutes she would be face to face with the man who had haunted her past, nor that her sons had prepared for this moment with the same meticulous precision they applied to everything in their extraordinary lives. While the elevator doors opened onto the glittering celebration, Jessica had no idea that in minutes she would be face to face with the man who had haunted her past, nor that her sons had prepared for this moment with the same meticulous precision they applied to everything in their extraordinary lives. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel pulsed with power and privilege. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light over Manhattan's business elite, their murmured conversations creating a sophisticated hum that filled the vast space. Jessica stepped from the elevator, her sons flanking her in perfect formation, and felt the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere as heads turned to observe their entrance. "Ms. Turner-Hayes," greeted Maxwell Chen, the association's chairman, approaching with an outstretched hand. "We're honored to have you and your remarkable sons with us tonight." Jessica smiled warmly, shaking his hand with confident pressure. "The honor is mine, Maxwell. The association has done extraordinary work promoting innovation in the financial sector." As they exchanged pleasantries, Jessica was acutely aware of the quadruplets beside her, their identical features composed in expressions of polite interest. At 14, they already stood nearly as tall as she did, their presence commanding attention even in this room full of powerful personalities. Across the ballroom, Richard Blackwood stood nursing his second scotch, his attention focused on the investment banker before him, a potential lifeline for his faltering company. The conversation felt increasingly one-sided as the banker's eyes drifted over Richard's shoulder, his interest clearly captured by something more compelling. "Excuse me," the banker said abruptly, "but I should pay my respects to Jessica Turner-Hayes. Remarkable woman, revolutionized algorithmic trading. Her company's Asian expansion is the talk of Singapore." Richard nodded stiffly, turning to follow the banker's gaze. Through the crowd, he glimpsed a striking woman in crimson, surrounded by what appeared to be 4 young men in identical tuxedos. Something about her carriage, the confident tilt of her head, tugged at his memory. "Turner-Hayes," he repeated, the name registering as vaguely familiar from board reports about competitors. "The startup that's been poaching our clients." The banker chuckled. "Hardly a startup anymore. Valued at nearly $5 billion last quarter. Started from nothing about 15 years ago. Single mother with quadruplets, if you can imagine. Built an empire while raising 4 boys alone." Richard's glass paused halfway to his lips, something cold slithering down his spine. Quadruplets. 15 years ago. A memory surfaced. A young woman standing in his office, tears streaming down her face as security escorted her out. "Excuse me," he muttered, setting down his glass and moving toward the woman in red, drawn by a growing certainty that made his heart race uncomfortably. The association president had taken the stage, tapping the microphone to gather attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats. Our program will begin momentarily." Jessica guided her sons toward their assigned table near the front, nodding acknowledgments to colleagues and competitors alike. She felt centered, composed, until a voice from the past sliced through her carefully constructed calm. "Jessica?" She turned slowly, 14 years of preparation crystallizing into this single moment. Richard Blackwood stood before her, his expression caught between disbelief and dawning recognition. He looked older, diminished somehow, his once commanding presence hollowed by stress and setbacks. His tuxedo, though clearly expensive, hung slightly loose on his frame, and the confident gleam she remembered in his eyes had dulled to uncertainty. "Richard," she acknowledged coolly, her voice steady, "it's been a long time." His gaze moved from her face to the 4 identical young men standing protectively beside her, their features unmistakably mirroring his own at their age. The same Blackwood blue eyes, the same distinctive jawline, the same aristocratic nose that had graced family portraits for generations. Richard's face drained of color. "These are your sons?" "Yes," Jessica replied simply. "Ethan, Noah, William, and James." The quadruplets regarded Richard with identical expressions of clinical interest, as though observing a specimen under glass. None offered a hand in greeting. "I didn't know," Richard stammered, his usual eloquence deserting him. "I never imagined—" "That's correct," Jessica interrupted smoothly. "You didn't know because you chose not to know. You made your position quite clear 14 years ago." The announcement cut through the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our Entrepreneur of the Year, the visionary founder and CEO of Innovate Hayes Solutions, Jessica Turner Hayes." Applause erupted around them. Jessica offered Richard a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "If you'll excuse me, I'm needed on stage." As she moved away, the quadruplets remained briefly, their gaze still fixed on Richard with unsettling intensity. Then, as one, they turned to follow their mother, leaving Richard frozen in place, his world fundamentally altered in the space of 30 seconds. Jessica ascended the steps to the stage with measured confidence, the spotlight warming her skin as she took position behind the podium. The applause continued, genuine appreciation from an industry that had once seemed impenetrable to a girl from Nebraska. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and steady, "it is with immense gratitude that I accept this recognition. When I founded Innovate Solutions 15 years ago, I was just a single mother with 4 newborns and an idea. The world said it was impossible, that I should give up, that I wasn't sufficient." Her eyes found Richard in the crowd, a momentary connection charged with 15 years of unspoken history. His face had gone ashen, his posture rigid with shock. "I stand before you tonight not to celebrate personal achievement but to honor resilience, the capacity to transform rejection into motivation, obstacles into opportunities, and limitations into launch pads." The audience hung on her words, unaware of the personal history unfolding before them, the private reckoning taking place across the crowded room. "It is with great honor that I accept this award not just for myself, but for my 4 greatest investments, Ethan, Noah, William, and James, who taught me that true success isn't measured by who accepts you, but by who you become when no one believes in you." The applause was deafening as Jessica accepted the Crystal Award, raising it slightly in acknowledgement. From their table, the quadruplets watched with identical expressions of pride, though their eyes occasionally shifted to monitor Richard's reaction. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour, Jessica found herself surrounded by admirers and potential partners, the industry's elite now eager to associate with her success. She navigated conversations with practiced ease, discussing expansion strategies and market innovations while maintaining an awareness of her son's whereabouts and Richard's position in the room. When she finally found herself momentarily alone, Richard appeared at her elbow, his composure partially restored though his eyes remained haunted. "Jessica," he managed, his voice lower than the surrounding chatter, "what you've accomplished is extraordinary. I never would have thought that I could succeed without you." Jessica finished for him, her tone conversational though her eyes were steel. "That a common girl from Nebraska could build something that would eclipse Blackwood Enterprises?" Richard flinched visibly at his own words thrown back at him. "I was wrong," he admitted, the sentence clearly costing him considerable effort. "About everything. If I had known about the boys—" "You did know," Jessica corrected him. "You knew I was pregnant. You simply decided we weren't worth your consideration." Their conversation was interrupted as the quadruplets approached, moving with the synchronized grace that often unnerved observers. They positioned themselves around Jessica, a protective formation that spoke volumes. "Mother," Ethan said formally, "the CEO of Goldman Sachs is asking to speak with you about the Asian expansion." Richard stared at the boys, unable to disguise his fascination and growing discomfort. "You're all so accomplished," he said awkwardly. "Your mother must be very proud." "She is," Noah replied coolly. "As was our father." Richard's expression faltered. "Your father?" "David Hayes," William explained, his tone making it clear the distinction was important. "He adopted us legally when we were 7. He was our father in every way that matters." I see, Richard said, something like regret flashing across his features. I would like to… that is, perhaps we could… Mr. Blackwood, James interrupted, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone that had once been Richard's trademark. Our mother has important connections to make this evening. Perhaps another time would be more appropriate for personal discussions. Before Richard could respond, a reporter from the Wall Street Journal approached, notepad in hand. Ms. Turner Hayes, could I get a comment on the rumors that Innovate Hayes Solutions is considering a hostile takeover of Blackwood Enterprises' technology division? Richard's head snapped up, shock evident on his face. Jessica smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Our acquisition team is constantly evaluating interesting opportunities, she replied smoothly. Traditionally managed companies that have failed to innovate often possess undervalued assets that could flourish under more visionary leadership. The reporter scribbled eagerly while Richard appeared physically ill, the implications of her statement clearly devastating. "Jessica, please," he implored quietly when the reporter had moved on. "I made a terrible mistake. I didn't know." "Do you know what your mistake was, Richard?" Jessica interrupted, her voice low but cutting. "It wasn't rejecting me. It was underestimating me. The check you gave me to disappear, I used it as seed capital for my company that now values 10 times more than yours. The best business decision you ever made was underestimating me." She turned to her sons. "Come, boys, we have important people to meet." As they moved away, the quadruplets looked back simultaneously, their identical blue eyes, Richard's eyes, fixed on him with cold curiosity before they followed their mother toward the center of the ballroom, where Manhattan's true power now gravitated. Richard remained rooted in place, the scotch in his hand forgotten, watching as Jessica was immediately surrounded by the financial elite who had once courted his favor. The four boys moved confidently through the crowd, clearly at ease in this world of power and privilege that should have been their birthright through him, but which they had instead earned through their mother's extraordinary determination. For the first time in 15 years, Richard Blackwood understood with perfect clarity exactly what he had thrown away with his casual cruelty. Not just a woman of remarkable potential, but 4 exceptional sons who carried his blood but owed him nothing. As Jessica laughed at something whispered by the Treasury Secretary, her crimson dress catching the light, Richard finally comprehended the full measure of his loss. For the first time in 15 years, Richard Blackwood understood with perfect clarity exactly what he had thrown away with his casual cruelty. Not just a woman of remarkable potential, but 4 exceptional sons who carried his blood but owed him nothing. As Jessica laughed at something whispered by the Treasury Secretary, her crimson dress catching the light, Richard finally comprehended the full measure of his loss. The following morning, Richard awoke to his phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. Squinting against his throbbing headache, the result of too many scotches after witnessing Jessica's triumph, he reached for the device. 27 missed calls, 43 text messages. His email notification showed 90+ unread messages. When he unlocked the screen, the reason became immediately clear. The New York Times headline glared up at him. Dynasty Blackwood redefined: how Jessica Turner built a $47 billion empire while raising alone the heirs Richard Blackwood never knew. Richard sat bolt upright, his hangover forgotten as cold dread washed over him. The article was comprehensive, devastating in its detail, describing Jessica's firing after revealing her pregnancy, the $50,000 check to make the problem disappear, and how she had transformed that money into seed capital for what was now Innovate Hayes Solutions. His phone rang again. His chief communications officer. "Richard, we need to issue a statement immediately. The story is everywhere. CNBC, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal. The stock is in free fall, down 23% in pre-market trading." By noon, the Blackwood Enterprises board had convened an emergency meeting. Richard sat at the head of the table, a position that had once filled him with confidence but now felt precarious. The faces around him reflected varying degrees of disgust and calculation. "This is beyond a PR disaster," Eleanor Winters stated flatly. "This strikes at the very heart of our corporate values. Abandoning a pregnant employee, attempting to pay for an abortion of what turned out to be quadruplets who are, by all appearances, your biological sons." "The optics are catastrophic," agreed another board member. "We've already received calls from 3 major institutional investors threatening to divest." Richard's lawyer leaned forward. "The statute of limitations on wrongful termination has long expired. Legally, there's no exposure." "This isn't about legal exposure," snapped Eleanor. "It's about moral bankruptcy. The Blackwood name has stood for integrity for 4 generations. Now it's synonymous with abandonment and callousness." Before Richard could respond, his assistant entered with a tablet. "Sir, you need to see this. Ms. Blackwood, your 3rd ex-wife, is live on CNBC." The room fell silent as Richard's most recent ex-wife appeared on screen, immaculately groomed and clearly enjoying her moment. "Richard's pattern of discarding women when they become inconvenient is well established," she was saying smoothly. "I wasn't surprised at all by the Jessica Turner story. It's entirely consistent with his character, or lack thereof." As the clip ended, Richard's phone chimed with a text from his current fiancée, a 29-year-old socialite. "The engagement is off. Don't call." 3 days later, Jessica stood on the grand steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, surrounded by press and distinguished guests. The morning sun illuminated her face as she prepared to cut the ceremonial ribbon for the new financial education wing funded by the Turner Hayes Foundation, a $25 million project designed to democratize financial knowledge for young people from underserved communities. "Financial literacy shouldn't be a privilege reserved for the elite," Jessica stated into the forest of microphones before her. "Every child deserves to understand how money works and how to make it work for them." As camera flashes captured the moment, Jessica noticed a disturbance at the edge of the crowd. Richard Blackwood was attempting to push through the security line, his appearance shockingly disheveled for a man once obsessed with immaculate presentation. His bespoke suit, though still expensive, was rumpled, his tie askew, dark circles prominent beneath his eyes. "Jessica, please," he called, his voice carrying across the marble steps. "5 minutes. Just 5 minutes." Before she could respond, the quadruplets moved as one, positioning themselves between her and Richard, a human barrier of identical young men in perfectly tailored suits. "Mr. Blackwood," Ethan addressed him with unnerving calm, "our mother is in the middle of an important philanthropic announcement. This is hardly the appropriate moment." Richard stared at the boy, his son, with a mixture of awe and desperation. "You know who I am?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the murmuring crowd. "Of course we know," Noah replied, his tone matter of fact. "Our mother never lied to us. We know exactly who you are and what you did. And also what you didn't do," William added quietly. "You never attended a single game, recital, competition, or birthday. And we also know that Blackwood Enterprises is on the verge of bankruptcy," James completed, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone that had once been Richard's trademark. "We've been discreetly purchasing 17% of the shares over the past 2 years. By the way, we used our own money, profits from the apps we developed." Richard staggered slightly as if physically struck. "You bought my company?" "No," Jessica interjected, finally stepping forward. "They bought a portion of the company that will one day be rightfully theirs. After all, they are Blackwoods, aren't they? The blood you're so proud of runs in their veins. The difference is that beyond the name, they have something you never had: integrity." Reporters pressed closer, recording every word of the confrontation. "Jessica, I beg you," Richard pleaded, his voice breaking. "Can we start over? Get to know my sons? Be part of their lives?" "Start over?" Jessica laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Richard, you never started. There's nothing to start over. As for being part of their lives, that's not my decision. They're 14 now. They're perfectly capable of deciding whether they want a relationship with the man who paid to ensure they wouldn't exist. The quadruplets regarded Richard with identical expressions of clinical assessment. "Perhaps we could schedule lunch," Ethan offered finally, "to discuss the restructuring of Blackwood Enterprises. We have some ideas about how the company might be saved with proper leadership." "A lunch? For business?" Richard mumbled, incredulous. "What other kind of relationship did you expect, Mr. Blackwood?" Noah asked, arching one eyebrow exactly as Richard himself did. "You're not our father. David Hayes was our father. You're merely a genetic donor who now requires our financial assistance." Richard lowered his head, finally comprehending the magnitude of his loss. Not just a family, but an empire, a legacy, a future. As photographers captured the moment, Jessica placed a hand on each of her son's shoulders. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "The decision is yours, and I'll respect whatever choice you make." 1 month later, the business world buzzed with news of Blackwood Enterprises restructuring. The venerable firm would be incorporated into Innovate Hayes Solutions' educational division, retaining the Blackwood name only as a secondary brand. Richard would remain as a senior consultant, a position with no real power but which preserved appearances. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, Jessica watched her 4 sons playing basketball on the private court of their Hamptons mansion. Her best-selling book, Enough: How to Transform Rejection into Revolution, had debuted at #1 on the New York Times list and been translated into 32 languages. Her phone chimed with an alert about the first formal meeting between her sons and Richard, scheduled for the following week. She felt a strange absence of emotion, neither hatred nor anger, not even satisfaction at the poetic justice of the situation. Just peace. As the sun began to set over the ocean, Jessica smiled to herself. The shadow of abandonment had finally dissipated, replaced by the brilliant light of a life lived on her own terms, sufficient, powerful, and entirely her own. She thought back to that day in Richard's office, his cruel words that had once cut so deeply. "You will never be enough, Jessica." Those words had fueled her for 15 years, driving her forward when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. Now they seemed as irrelevant as the man who had spoken them. Jessica Turner Hayes had built far more than a financial empire. She had constructed a full life, extraordinary children, and complete liberation from the power Richard once held over her. The man who had declared she would never be enough was now merely a footnote in her triumph story. In the distance, her sons laughed as James made an impressive 3-point shot. They were magnificent young men, brilliant, kind, confident in their place in the world. They were her greatest achievement, far surpassing any business success. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the continued expansion into Asian markets, the educational initiatives she was passionate about, guiding her sons through their remarkable adolescence. Richard Blackwood might be part of that future in some peripheral way, or he might fade from their lives entirely. Either way, his power to hurt or define her was gone, evaporated like morning mist under the strong sun of her success. The quadruplets jogged toward her, their identical faces flushed with exertion and youth. "Mom, did you see that shot?" James called excitedly. "Statistically improbable," Ethan added with a small smile. "Aesthetically perfect," William contributed. "Absolutely showing off," Noah concluded with a laugh. Jessica opened her arms, embracing her sons, these extraordinary young men who had been both her greatest challenge and her greatest blessing. As they surrounded her with their vibrant energy, she knew with bone-deep certainty that every struggle, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt had been worth it. While the sun set over the ocean, Jessica smiled to herself. The shadow of abandonment had finally dissipated, replaced by the brilliant light of a life lived on her own terms, sufficient, powerful, and entirely her own. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.